I guess I also live in the woods in what we call our temporary autonomous zone, and we like to say temporary because we understand it's a fleeting. We don't expect to be in the patch of woods that we're in forever, but as long as we are there, we're free. And but to answer a few questions that were asked of Michael about living in the woods, I'll kind of get my quick response before I dive in, as everyone's kind of sitting down. One thing that was asked was kind of about how we protect our valuables, and one thing, as Michael said, is a segment of the homeless population is definitely lazy, and therefore having a long, kind of energy-intensive trail into where we live is a pretty good deterrent, because then the only thing they really want to steal is they say, well, it's a lot of energy to get something else. They want to steal light, small things that are worth a lot of value. And Michael and I just do a good job of not having any of those. My iPad is probably the only one, and I just keep that in my backpack. So we actually haven't had a lot of issues with that sort of thing. But yeah, I've had a lot of homeless friends now, kind of, or acquaintances. Most of them are really cool to talk to. A lot of them have really amazing ideas, which is until... I don't like to say I'm homeless because I feel like I have a home. It just happens to be a tent, and it happens to be in some wood, or like on some land I don't legally own. But my perception of homeless people versus what I've come to know of them was drastically different. So I definitely second Michael and encourage people to meet some, talk to them. They definitely have their flaws. There's definitely some ones out there that are doing some things I would never approve of. But there's a lot of really cool ones out there that have a lot of amazing thoughts. But I'll come in and dive into what my talk is about here today. Kind of touches on what Michael and I are doing. I called it the property conundrum. So as Michael said, for the past 3 months, we've been living in the woods, and I've been living in a tent in the woods, more specifically. And I found removing myself from a more contemporary existence has helped me think more critically about the things around me. And since I don't legally own the land I'm living on, the concept of property has been a frequent conundrum of mine, and one I'd like to share some thoughts on. So many would describe what Michael and I are doing, but to put it more towards me, they would describe us as homeless squatters. And but I feel like I have a home, and in fact, I feel as though I have a greater claim, or I can claim that I have a home with greater honesty than most of those people whose homes are owned by the bank or they're renting from the government. So the real question is, what exactly does ownership mean? And I think it's definitely a confusing term. But if you define ownership as utilizing something without making reoccurring payments, then paradoxically the only way to truly own something is through squatting. Gotta change that sleep timer. It goes off pretty quick. So delving deeper into this paradox has left me with, honestly, more questions than answers. I definitely don't have all the answers to this, but I sure do have a lot of questions about property. And one would be, when is it morally acceptable or permissible to use land? The land I occupy, as I said, is legally owned by a corporation, which makes it clear to me that I am doing nothing wrong. A corporation cannot be harmed because it's a fictitious legal entity, not a sentient being. Only individuals can be harmed. So my presence there is not causing any individuals to suffer. Perhaps then, the measure of moral land use is based on the impact it has on others. Which also makes me wonder, is it morally acceptable for an individual to claim land in quantities beyond what they could reasonably use? For instance, can a person reasonably use 10,000 acres of land? Which begs the question, what constitutes acceptable use anyway? As someone who grew up with parents involved in finance and me being previously in the finance industry myself, an argument I've run into a lot about is that the current property rights as currently constituted allow for the more efficient distribution of scarce resources. And honestly, that's a concept that I still wrestle with quite a bit. I definitely don't have an answer there, but it's probably the one that's caused me the most amount of thought as of late. So hopefully I've demonstrated that property and the idea of ownership are not as obvious or as objective as they may seem, and they're deeply rooted in the way we use language. It's hard to talk without using possessive pronouns, and rarely do we think of the implications that come from that. Living in the woods has afforded me the opportunity to confront many of my preconceived notions ahead, or has allowed me to confront many of my preconceived notions head-on and investigate the validity of some of my ideas. And I'm excited to continue this journey and look forward to the discoveries that lie ahead. So I'll open up for questions, and I'll, proceed that by saying, clearly I have a lot of questions and not a lot of answers, but I am excited to hear these.
Could you kind of explain the conundrum that you struggle with, kind of more like
if I had to simplify
scenario, or just because I thought about property as probably a lot of us, thinking, staring at the ceiling in bed, thinking about property when I just did that. But
definitely.
I think in my mind, I've sort of resolved some of those conundrums, but there may be things I'm not thinking of, so I just want to know what you're thinking.
Well, I will start by saying I don't think I have solved them yet. But from my talks with many people in the libertarian, anarchist, kind of whatever, I think we all struggle to like give ourselves a name, right? It's kind of part of the individualism that we believe in, makes it hard to like fall under a banner. But a lot of the arguments I've brought up is very protect our property, protect our individual freedom. But I don't really know. I think the word own is a weird word, and I have a hard time. I think the way most people view ownership as a word, Michael and I were talking about this earlier, is it kind of has two parts. One part is not wanting to make reoccurring payments, basically not wanting to rent an object. And that translates more to land than anything. So there's that, but the other part of ownership is people want to have the exclusive rights to use that thing. And if other people use it, oftentimes those same people want to be able to respond potentially violently to protect it. So I think there's kind of two things there. The first one I'm interested in. I'm interested in not having reoccurring payments forevermore to use something. Right. So reoccurring payments. So a lot of people that own their homes, right, I'm saying they're renting even because they're renting via property taxes, right? So inherently the people who think they own something generally are paying property taxes, and that's why I think perhaps I'm the only person, or squatting in general is the only way to truly own land because I'm renting from no one. But I don't necessarily believe in the second part of ownership that I brought up, which is I don't really have a lot of interest in exclusively being the only person to use, for example, the land that I tend to occupy in the woods. That's not super appealing to me. And I think that's perhaps the portion of ownership that most people get hung up on, is they want to be, this is mine, right? You can't come on this chunk of land, and if you do, I have the right to do what I want. So that's kind of how I was looking at ownership. As far as property rights, so I don't know. I have a hard time. I feel good, I feel moral living on this piece of land that's owned by a corporation. If it was even legally owned by just an individual, I feel like this would be a much harder thought process for me to identify. I mean, Michael and I, when we found this piece of land, one thing that was really appealing to us is it was owned by a corporation. It made me not have to think so hard about whether or not I felt it to be moral there, whereas if an individual owned it, this would be a much harder conversation for me to have.
Well, wouldn't you consider, like, the lady who was sitting here, she's talking about her bucket, right?
Mm-hmm.
She buries. For me, if I look at that, no matter where it is, like, that's hers. Like,
right.
Just because in my mind, my principles, that I attribute that to the fruits of her. But if I have a house, let's say, you would look at it, even though I'm paying rent, to say, you would still look, from your perspective, you would look at that as mine, wouldn't you? Because I put let's say I built it on the land, like this thing.
I would.
But I still don't technically, I own it, but someone who has lots of force doesn't think I do, or they think I do, don't care. They're still going to take stuff from me.
I think use is a big part of this. So like, what started this is it moral to have land? Or the question that I think I jumped into as far as, is this okay, is this not okay, that sort of thing, is it being utilized? Is a big portion of this. So for example, your house, even if you have it in traditional means, right, and you're living in it, you're using it. So to me, I would have no interest or desire, nor would I think it was more. I would think, well, you're using it. Again, the word ownership is something I'm battling with. It's a word that I don't even know what it means, honestly. That's part of the problem. But if you have a home, or you're paying, rent for the house, I clearly would think it was immoral if I intruded upon that house, if that's the question. Is that kind of what you're wondering? Or like her bucket, for example, she's using, even though she put it in the ground and put things in it, she's using those things at some point. I think the lack of utilization of an area is perhaps land that I feel is questionable on whether or not it's moral to be on or not. In this case, from a corporation standpoint, I didn't think it was immoral for us to occupy. Kicking me off?
No. I had a question.
Okay, I think was it Stephen? I think Stephen may have had his hand up first, and then can I get you, Kate?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then I think we'll probably be at time.
So, I don't know if you want to.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Have you read either Man, Economy, and State or Power and Market by Murray Rothbard?
So I've started reading Power and Market, but I would be lying if I said I've completed it. So that's actually a recent endeavor, is reading a lot of Rothbard. Which is actually the name of the dog you guys have seen running around.
Yeah. There's actually a really extensive discussion of just this point you can say, including land issues. Is it laying idle versus in use, and who has first right, and so on. So I couldn't recite the details by heart because it's like a 1,200-page book.
You can try.
Yeah, I think that, okay. Well, there's not much time. I think you'll find interesting discussion as you think through these issues.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, no, I haven't. It's a huge book, as you said. I just flipped a few pages and I got distracted by some Samuel Conkin stuff, so I haven't got back to it. But definitely want to look into it. And I think basically what I did was I wanted to jump. Sometimes I think you have to. I mean, obviously murder, things like that, we don't have to do before we know if they're immoral. But sometimes I think it helps to kind of dive in and see how it feels and interact with an idea hands-on. To help you craft what you think.
But not with murder.
Not with murder. Some of them are clearly, obviously, don't do them. Well, you guys haven't murdered people, though?
Oh, I was curious about one of your points that you brought up when you were talking about your own conception of property. And
I'm still, this is definitely an evolving thing for me. So I don't have set views, but yeah.
Well, you said that you didn't really have any interest in like the second form of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, I just wanted to clarify like how far that goes. Like if somebody went into your tent at night and like, wouldn't leave, that's what I was kind of wondering, like, because I personally would have an interest in, if somebody came into my apartment, like violence isn't the first thing I would resort to, but if they wouldn't leave, like eventually.
Yeah, no, that's part of the part I struggle with. I definitely disagree with the second phase of ownership that I was talking about.
Yeah.
From a standpoint of if I have a plot of land. I don't know, the idea of like extra land that's I'm kind of interacting with but not directly using, the second part is not super important to me. The things that I directly interact with frequently, which this is where it all gets subjective, like what's frequently, what's not, and that's a big part of the battle with thinking about property specifically, but I guess a lot of things that many of us are questioning is, I don't know, like my tent, and Michael and I were talking about this earlier, like the land generally around my tent, don't have a lot of, I don't mind if people are walking around there, that doesn't bother me, I don't think I have any reason to be like, hey, you're kind of close to my tent. Inside the tent itself, yeah, that would be super weird, and I think people should probably stay out of my tent. I think they probably shouldn't put on my clothes when I'm not around. Like, those sorts of things would be, well, Michael may have already done it. We should have talked about this before. We've both gone on a lot of trips, so I don't know what he's done in there. But, yeah, I'd say the tent, like, I don't want people inside my own structure.
Capitalist.
But I don't know where, I haven't found that line. Like, I don't really want, I set my cell phone on a table, I don't really want everyone else to go up and start texting their friends with my phone, even though in that moment I'm not using it. So like finding what that line is very difficult, and that's probably the biggest part is like, where does this idea end and begin? And also the timeline thing, so homeless culture, and I'll kind of wrap this up, but homeless culture we found, which has been cool interacting with it, because we've learned a lot, but typically, no one messes with other homeless people's stuff overall, but homeless culture is very nomadic, so eventually things go abandoned. And what we found is there's some sort of arbitrary timeline when things haven't changed where homeless people think it's fair game to take. They assume you're not using it anymore. What that arbitrary line is, how long does something need to go unused before they feel as though they can utilize it? I don't know. I haven't figured out where that boundary is, but that's kind of a cool nuance of homeless culture. Is there's everyone has their own arbitrary line they'll wait before they assume it's not being utilized, and then they think it's fair game. And I think to some extent maybe this is the same thing, because I'll probably leave that tent there whenever I move on from this patch of woods, and I certainly don't mind if people use the tent in the future once I've abandoned it. But I don't know, that's one of the hardest questions. There's about 50 questions on property. I have no idea how I feel about it.
Does that go the same with
But I think suffering, like individuals, like the suffering you cause an individual for using something might be one of the best metrics, or your perception of how much suffering it will bring someone else to use an item might be a good metric that I'm considering as maybe a good way to create a baseline. That I don't really know them.
Just about the homeless thing, I'm curious, does that go the same with like where each person kind of camps out? Like maybe like,
yeah.
I was just thinking about today, like, oh, that lady's always there, like, what are the rules there? There must be some rules within the, like, if she wasn't there for a week, would someone else say, oh?
Yeah, a week might be long enough. That's the thing. But
don't go on vacation.
Yeah, like a skip a day or a couple days or 3 days or whatever, you're probably safe. But as far as if you're there consistently, it's been shockingly impressive to me how respectful other homeless people are of not stealing things. It's kind of incredible and maybe a testament to anarchy. But there is a pretty short timeline on what it takes before people say, oh, they're gone.
Okay.
Yeah, a week might be long enough. Because they're pretty nomadic, so a week a lot of times is, honestly, they've abandoned it. But, yeah. Anyway, so I have no answers, lots of questions. Hope you guys enjoyed it.